Welcome to Travel Stories with your hosts, Trevor Mountcastle and Tom Kim. This episode, we talk about some recent far-flung travels. I think we'll call it far-flung travels. I think my trip was October, Tom. Yours was November.
Just a little bit after yours.
Yeah. I think we were ships passing in the night, sometimes figuratively, sometimes literally.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you? How did that trip go? And do you want to go in time order, or do you want to dive in on yours?
If you want, I can talk about mine.
Let's talk through your trip. This was another cruise, right?
It was.
This is your 10th cruise of the year?
I wish. This might only be my fifth cruise, fourth cruise. I'm trying to even remember now. That's actually a good question. Which cruise is this? I think this is the fourth cruise of the year, if I'm not mistaken.
Only the fourth. Wow.
I know. That's how the mighty have fallen.
Times change. Folks, if you thought that there was a problem with the economy, this is your sign. This is your leading indicator. So I think we had sort of hinted at this trip on a previous episode where we talked about booking flights to Australia and sort of how you almost had that perfect itinerary.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to get it?
Almost this entire trip was booked entirely over again. Like it was never, I think I've had at least 3 or 4 iterations of the flights. And in the previous episode, we talked about doing some creative routing through Vietnam. Well, that gets a little hard when one of the airlines you plan on flying goes bankrupt or stops flying internationally. puts a little damper in your plans.
And of course, the irony is it's bamboo. Usually once you have bamboo, you can't get rid of it. But apparently that doesn't work in airlines.
Grows like a weed, apparently, but not when it comes to airplane routes, I guess.
And they had some really interesting stuff. They were flying 787s to London and I think some other places in Europe, and then down to Australia. So They were a pretty attractive airline. It's unfortunate that it didn't work out.
Yeah, it's one of the partners that seem to have a pretty good availability if you know where to look for it for their somewhat limited number of international routes, and now they don't have any. But the writing was on the wall. Fortunately, it didn't happen as a complete surprise. I mean, there were some articles about them not being able to pay their pilots, and I was like, okay, I guess I should probably not count on this flight happening. So I was like, let me go look at some alternatives. And one of the alternatives that I actually found was an American Airlines award flying direct from LA on an American Airlines 777 in first class, which not the most aspirational product, but definitely one that I haven't flown in a number of years, and I was kind of excited for it. And I think I mentioned earlier, I was really excited for it, or I wasn't that excited for it until for some reason I couldn't book it anymore, and I got really sad. And I realized, it kind of errored out when booking, and then the availability went away. But actually, what it actually ended up doing was saving it as a saved itinerary that I could just call in and actually book. So that's what I ended up booking.
Oh, you can't beat that. That A321T, of all the things that I've flown, the A321T is one of those few things that I just haven't been able to fly.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, get on that, my friend. They're not that long for this world, I don't think.
I don't think they are. So the A321T going from JFK, you got lounge access.
They did.
They have those new lounges. I haven't been there yet. It's the Chelsea and what's the other one?
Greenwich, I think.
Greenwich.
I think there's 3 flavors. It's like Chelsea, Greenwich, and Soho. It's like those neighborhoods that exist both in the New York area and the London area.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense. And not having been to New York in a while, is the Chelsea the best one? Is that the first class one?
Yes, that's the one that's only available to first class passengers. And I forget who else has access. I don't think Executive Platinum have access to Chelsea. I think they have access to Greenwich, I think. And then I think you have to actually be flying first class for Chelsea.
So then that was a pretty exclusive experience. How was that?
As I've read some other reviews about it before going in, so I did have some expectations, and they were definitely met. But I understand why some people were like, go get the meal in Chelsea and then go hang out in Greenwich or one of the other lounges, because it's kind of a dungeon. It's dark and kind of there's no views of anything, no outside windows. I was spent actually a lot of time in there because I had to sit down kind of lunch in there, and I was literally the only one in the lounge, or maybe there was one other person, for about 2 hours, which was very luxurious. I mean, that's kind of fun having the lounge pretty much to yourself, but I didn't really make that much use of it. I just had my meal, did some work on my laptop. That's about it.
So you effectively had the private room experience in JFK.
That would be a good way of summing it up. Yeah. And I would kind of echo, it's nice to be in there. It's nice for the exclusivity. It's nice to be in the most populated lounge at JFK. However, the atmosphere there is not great. And, I had the food as well. I thought it was all right, but I mean, I got to finally try out a Polaris lounge the other day. I felt our meal in the Polaris was a little bit superior to the one that I had in Chelsea.
That says a lot, considering one is pegged as a business class lounge and Chelsea is pegged as a first class lounge. I would have probably compared or expected to be able to compare Chelsea to, for example, the Concorde room.
And that's what it replaces, right? Because when the BA left Terminal 7 to core Terminal 8, this is now the replacement, right? The joint BA AA lounge. Again, it's definitely serviceable. And I don't remember the Concorde room at JFK being all that great either, to be completely honest. So I would say this is probably a pretty good replacement for that. And obviously all brand new finishes and furnishings are all very nice. No problem with the service or the staff. Otherwise, the environment is just, unfortunately, the space at the terminal they chose was the one that has no views of anything. So it's a little bit dreary.
That's one area where I think a lot of lounges kind of missed the mark. And British Airways is really good at missing that mark. Well, you think about the Philly lounge. It's a beautiful lounge, but it's interior. At least they have some windows so you can sort of see out into the terminal. You think about the one in
Terminal 5?
Boston.
Oh, in Austin. Okay.
I was going to say in Boston, they have...
It's in the basement, right?
Yeah, it's a basement. And then, gosh, I mean, those lounges in T5 are I think, very nice with nice views and such, but so very crowded. But this isn't a podcast about British Airways' lounges, and
I guess it's not.
And
it's easy to go on. It's easy to go on tangents when we're talking about this stuff. But yeah, no, it was interesting. But the most interesting part about this whole trip, however, was getting a call from American Airlines about an hour before heading to the airport. So that was kind of interesting. Let me tell you about that.
Does that sort of mean that your heart was in your throat? You're sort of wondering, is my flight actually going to be flying? And, do you have a seat?
My blood pressure went up a little bit, or at least my heart rate, for a minute, because I said, American Airlines, why are they calling me on my cell phone? So close to my flight. Well, and it turns out, not when they call you, it's not always bad news. So the funny thing was they called me and they were like, Mr. Kim, could you do us a favor? Usually when they start off that way, it's usually a positive thing. So in this case, what they said was, well, guess what happened? They overbooked first on American. American's LA to Sydney flight was overbooked in first for some operational reason. They didn't give me the details, which why would they? But I almost wonder if it had something to do with what was going on with the new pilots. What is it, concession that they made to have pilots be able to fly or sit in first class when they're This
is exactly what I was thinking. I was exactly thinking, yeah, they probably have a pilot on board that they've got a provision of first class seat. So now you're impacted.
Yes. So they asked me if I could leave an hour earlier from JFK and have a slightly earlier flight from LAX. And it turns out on Qantas. I'm like, Qantas first, American first. What do I do?
My gosh. What a hard choice.
What a hard choice. Of course, I agreed. And for my trouble, they gave me an extra $500 flight credit. That doesn't suck. So.
Wow. Okay. So not only did they upgrade you.
Yes.
But they gave you some money to be super flexible.
Correct. The only downside was obviously my plans for LAX lounge hopping were somewhat dashed because I didn't have a whole long layover at LAX. I was planning on trying to actually visit the Sky Club at LAX, which I have yet to visit while I was on my long layover, but it was going to be a much more curtailed layover with this. I still made it to the first class lounge. It was great. Had my salt and pepper squid. Enjoyed the first class lounge, which also doesn't have a view in LAX. Another first class lounge with no view of anything.
That's interesting because the Star Alliance lounge there does. They even have like a little open air
terrace, right?
Yeah, that terrace.
Yeah, no, the windows look out at the terminal essentially. At I guess the nice thing about the Qantas First Lounge is it is extremely close to the connector bridge to the rest of the AA gate, so it's the least walk of all the T-bit lounges that you have to when you transit from a domestic flight.
That's helpful. Talking about things that I don't do very often, I've only flown out of Tom Bradley International Terminal, I want to say twice. Wow. Might have only been once.
No wonder you never fly the A321T. I mean, come on.
I mean, it's the double connect thing.
Yes,
Normally,
yes.
I'll reposition for flights overseas, but to reposition to fly via JFK, we did that once to JFK, once to Boston, and both of them just felt so inconvenient.
It was. I mean, don't get me wrong. So this was a double connect for me too. So, I actually, the night before, flew up to JFK, overnighted at the courtyard over there at JFK. Oh, no, it was Residence Inn, actually. And it's actually pretty nice. But you're right. It does make it. But, in this case, it was kind of like this was going to be my ode to first class on American, which, is unfortunately not long for this world. They're going to probably get rid of both of these cabins in the next year or two, both on the A321T and the 777. And I guess I get to fly the 777.
Is it really in the year that they're getting rid of them? I didn't realize that they were that short for this world.
I have a feeling it's probably later part of 2025, but I'd probably have to go take a quick search and look at it. But how about this? I doubt you're going to be able to get these things in 2026. I would think. I think that's probably for sure when you're not going to see much of this anymore.
Yeah, so I need to get after that. I got to get my Paris Hilton A321T first class seat.
Yep. Yeah, it is a nice seat. I mean, it's especially it's hard to beat that across the transcontinental. And there's so few people on the plane, and the plane only seats like 100 something people, with all the premium heaviness of the flight. It's like 120 or something. Happened to sit behind Christopher Lloyd of Back to the Future fame.
Great Scott!
Great Scott! So definitely great for, I guess, celebrity watching, because I would imagine it's very highly frequented by the New York, LA crowd that commute back and forth. Yeah, I mean, it was perfectly nice, and the flight attendants were really great. This was actually a Halloween night that I flew the transcon flight, and brought them some chocolates, and they actually were really, really friendly and talkative, and were excited about the fair trade chocolate that I brought them. So
fair trade.
I just happened to buy this one package of chocolates, which strangely enough they were showcasing on like John Oliver, like last week tonight, the day, like the week before. And the flight attendants were, hey, was this a chocolate that they, and it was the chocolate bar that they happened to like showcase on this last week tonight HBO show. And it just happened to be what I bought at Target to have for gifts for people for flight crews on this trip. Anyway, another tangent.
You are awfully trendy.
Accidentally trendy, apparently. Accidentally trendy sometimes. I had no intention of doing it. I just, that looks kind of pretty. I'll buy that chocolate,
Well, a happy accident, and it sounds like
Yes.
a bunch of happy accidents. You got through your first class lounge.
Mm-hmm. Made it onto the A380 to Sydney all the way. And honestly, it's funny. We say it's an upgrade. We say that Qantas First is going to be amazing. Don't get me wrong. It's a good product. But you forget there's 14 seats on an A380 in first class. Do you believe it?
I do. I mean, having flown it a couple of times, it feels like a full cabin. But
It does.
the interesting thing, though, about it is it's what, a 111 configuration. So you get into that, AC, and just like our favorite in Virgin Atlantic, the middle seat, I think, looks toward the right, toward the K seats. Now, obviously, there's a lot of privacy and you're not staring at people. But if you're traveling with a partner, you want to be in that middle seat, and then the K seat is my recollection.
Even with this kind of late booking, I managed to get a window seat, which is nice. I'm not sure if I would pick that seat again. It was the first row, and the problem is there's a lot of activity there, especially because one of the cabinets that holds all the bedding, all like the mattress pads and everything, was like right close to my seat. So there was a lot of rustling of mattress pads during the early part of the flight. And then toward the end of the flight attendants were busily trying to stuff the mattress pads back into that cabinet.
And that's exactly why I don't like the first row on the Lufthansa 787 or 7478 Intercontinental, because they have those cabinets right in the nose. And it's the same exact experience. They're stuffing things in. I mean, that cabinet, it's only used 2 times through the flight, but it's really disruptive when they are using it. So tell us about the experience, right? So obviously lots of seats in the cabin, but
Yes.
Was this the upgraded? I think they're doing a refresh. I don't know how much they've rolled out, if any.
This is, I think, the second time I've flown A380 long haul first class on Qantas. And I do remember it does seem like a refresh of what I had sat in before. I think gone are the lamb's wool or lambskin mattress pads.
Oh my gosh, that was the most comfortable bed in the sky.
Yeah. The mattress pads still exist though, and they're I think they're just foam now instead of filled with. I mean, I didn't open up and see what was inside, but it didn't feel like the old wool kind of mattress pads that were part of the service previously. The seat overall is pretty similar to what I remember it from last time, but I mean, I think the screen was a little bit bigger maybe, and maybe some of the other finishes had been updated a little bit, but not terribly.
Yeah, when we flew that before the pandemic, it felt tired. You could
Mm-hmm.
see, the leather was starting to get a little bit worn. It was just a wonderful seat, just
Scuffed up a
not
little bit.
maintained as well as you'd expect. Which is funny because if you go back to our first episode when we were talking about the Japan Airlines flight,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the fact that those aircraft probably at that time were older than the A380s, and Japan Airlines just maintains. I mean, it literally could have rolled out of the factory the day before we flew.
Yeah, they definitely are doing the right job when it comes to like upkeep on the various finishes in the cabin. This one I didn't notice anything overly used or scuffed or in disrepair, so it felt like it had been refreshed at some point in the recent past. I mean, it's just a solid first class product. I had really good sleep, 14, 15-hour flight, and I definitely got 8 hours plus of sleep on this plane, which is unusual. But, obviously it definitely had the amount of airtime to be able to accommodate that. But, it also helps that there are air vents that didn't keep the cabin super hot. And, the
the
bedding is excellent.
small things that we cherish, air vents.
It's funny. It makes a huge difference. I think having that.
It
That's why
absolutely
I
does.
travel with a fan because, it's very unusual many times to have an air vent in a premium class seat at these days. But, otherwise it was, what I realized about Qantas first is part of the allure is just, despite them having so many seats on an A380, just the impossibility of the unicornness of the product, in terms of getting it as an award seat, right? That's kind of the allure more than anything else. It's the exclusivity again of being able to get that for miles and points.
It's so true. I mean, Australia is hard enough, perhaps not in the last 2 months, as we've seen so much
Mm-hmm.
space getting released. Other than
Mm-hmm.
the past 2 months, Australia alone is a hard award to find. And really, Qantas is probably the best possible award or best possible first class seat that you can get to Australia in without going crazy, like going through
Yes, yeah.
Dubai or Etihad,
Going through some other
going through the
far-flung
Middle East.
hubs.
Yeah, and it's funny because Sydney probably gets a whole lot of really great products, right? So they get the Emirates A380, they get the Qatar A380. I think they get the Etihad A380, or at least they used to. I know I've flown it a couple
Mm-hmm.
of times. And then obviously they have
Flown it there as well.
Qantas's, and they're getting flagship first from American. United's kind of, United.
Mm-hmm.
They used to get a 747. I flew that a couple of times to Sydney. Older seat, but it did have first class. Not that I was in it. I was in business class and one time actually in economy. I don't want to go back there. Those were the old days when you had the projector IFE, to just put that into perspective.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, so was there anything special about the catering? Any notable beverages? They used to serve the nice Tattinger. I think it was Comps. I probably don't pronounce it right.
I could probably go look at, if you like. I can go find the menu and figure out what I actually didn't partake in any alcoholic beverages. I mean, it was kind of a nighttime flight, and I'm kind of a lightweight anyway when it comes to drinking, so decided to not partake in very much beverage wise. I think they did have a signature beverage, and I just forgot to order it. I think I just had my usual Diet Coke, so can't speak to that much. Catering was decent. I was taking a look at my photos before this. Not super memorable because I don't really have anything to say about it really, other than it was decent. Of course, part of the problem is I think I was not terribly hungry. I was had a meal at the Qantas First Lounge before. So one of the downsides with having such a quality lounge product is sometimes it takes away from any in-flight experience because you're enjoying what they have to offer on land.
But I think the ground experience is always going to be superior, right? I think the best possible made in the air meal is going to be inferior to the ground. And so if you can get a really nice meal prior to your flight, I think the overall experience is going to just be better and takes a little bit of that expectation off the table.
I'm not saying that's always going to be the case with all carriers. I feel like some carriers just really hit above their weight class when it comes to catering in the air. especially compared to the lounge. I think going back to our first episode again, Japan Airlines is another one of those where honestly, the lounge food, pretty mediocre, in the first class lounge, but what they cater in the air, so much better. And mainly that's just because, again, they can, I guess they just invest in that catering program in the air and not on the ground.
Yeah, using that Japan Airlines, I could totally get there. I guess in my head, I was thinking more like your Lufthansa first class type experience.
Right. Oh, that's a good point.
Your Etihad or your Qatar or your Emirates. I mean,
but they don't serve caviar in the lounge.
No, you don't get the caviar, but you get a nice Wagyu beef burger or a nice thick cut of meat. Again, in my view, the lounge sort of takes the edge off, right? You're going to have a nice, relaxing experience that sort of sets the table, so to speak, for what's to come. But anyway, so nothing terribly memorable on the on that flight. What'd you do in Sydney before the cruise?
I had some wonderful meals. I stayed at the Shangri-La Hotel, which I used one of my Amex FHR nights prior to my cruise, and then was there with my friends. One of them had some college friends that lived in the area still, and we had a lovely dinner with a wonderful view of Sydney Harbor in kind of the old customs house. A nice little seafood dinner and some drinks afterward at a very fancy bar. That was pretty much the majority. That's pretty much all I had time for, really, quite honestly. And other than a quick walk around the Botanic Gardens and kind of the harbor area, that's about it.
Okay,
and it was time for the cruise.
And the cruise went from Circular Quay?
It did, from the overseas terminal building, which is right there. It's like, kitty corner away from the Park Hyatt, right there in front of some of the restaurants in the Rocks. I think we've walked through that building before, that overseas terminal building on a previous trip.
Yeah, we were there for Vivid. I think we talked about it on episode 8 with Jeff and Joey, and they actually had an American Express lounge, pop-up lounge there. Nice to have gotten in there. I'd imagine that it's probably not nearly as nice when there's not a pop-up lounge, but still a nice experience to be getting onto. You said the Ovation of the Seas. Is that a Quantum class?
Yeah, Quantum class ship from Royal Caribbean. Yeah, the embarkation process was really good. They knew what they were doing. It was pretty smooth. I got on the ship really quick after getting there. And we strategically, I think, got there probably closer to one-ish, I think. And doing so meant that, when we got on board, our rooms were ready, which was great. So we just kind of put all our stuff and start unpacking immediately and didn't have to wait around, milling around places to wait for our rooms to be ready. Yeah, and that started off a really nice cruise. Again, can't really speak highly enough about cruising from Sydney is the views, or if you've got a balcony cabin or if you go up a topside to some of the decks, the public decks. The best part is obviously the wonderful views of the harbor. I mean, almost better than what you'd have on almost any hotel, because many of the hotels are not even as tall as the cruise ship. I mean, definitely the Park Hyatt is, and it's only, 4 stories, 5 stories tall. And then cruise ship, you got up to like, deck 14, deck 15. Get some really nice views of the Sydney Harbor Bridge and the Opera House, and then of course the Sailaways is pretty spectacular too.
Oh yeah, that's got to probably be one of the most epic Sailaways, probably on par with New York or maybe even better.
Yep, definitely up there in terms of Sailaway experiences. So not to be missed. As far as the cruise itself, pretty routine. I mean, not too much to speak of. Royal Caribbean wise, very very by the book. The ports were okay. The one I took, we did a New Caledonia and Mystery Island, Vanuatu were the only 2 ports. So this is a very sea day heavy itinerary. And the ports were nice. I mean, I like New Caledonia. We had some excellent baked goods. I mean, New Caledonia, for those of you who don't know, is a French overseas protectorate. And, so all they're all citizens of France there. They do have their own currency, though. And we went to a couple of, I still need to figure out what the difference between a boulangerie and a patisserie versus a viennoiserie is, because they had all of those. And we visited at least 2 of them, 2 of the 3. And I still don't know what the difference is. But the French influence is very high in the island. And that's a good thing, at least when it comes to, going out for lunch and buying, a baguette or having a pastry or sandwich or something like that. They were all very good.
So other than the food, what else was there to see in New Caledonia?
Well, we did a quick tour of the island. We were only there for a few hours, which is the unfortunate thing, obviously, with cruises. You're only there for, you dock in the morning and then you're leaving usually in the early afternoon, late afternoon time frame. In this case, we got to see most of the island. The weather was not quite as cooperative on this cruise. The weather in Sydney was fine. It's just on some of the port days there was a little bit of rain and a little gloomy, some overcastness. But the island itself, again, very beautiful. Reminded me a lot of Hawaii, like with a French flair, I guess, is probably the best way that I would describe it. Definitely more Oahu than Kona in terms of it. There are quite a few people that live in New Caledonia. It's fairly well populated, and it's definitely got some urban pieces too, which is nice because you can, experience some of that too. You can get some of a nice restaurant and some other nice things there that you might not have if it were more rural. Vanuatu, on the other hand, very different than New Caledonia. I think the island we visited is kind of like a island they set up just for cruise ships. It's really not anybody who lives on that island. It's just a landing strip there, really, and some lovely beaches. And we did get some nice beach time there. Although again, the weather was a little overcast, a little chillier than I think some people would have preferred. The water was definitely temperature was a little bit colder than ideal, but we still had some good beach time there, and even managed to get even though it was overcast, we managed to get a slight sunburn.
So you effectively flew greater than halfway around the world for a cruise that had one meaningful island and then one kind of cruise island and a bunch of sea days.
Yes. So, I mean, I would I recommend it for people? I might pick a different itinerary if you were expecting to see more of Australia or the South Pacific. There's probably some more port intensive itineraries. Probably the 7-night cruise that just visits Vanuatu and New Caledonia. Because I would say, as far as the quality of the ports and things like that, you could probably do better with some other itineraries in other parts of the world. That being said, again, cruising out of Sydney itself is pretty spectacular. So that adds into the equation. And the cruise itself was very nice. Everything, the usual Royal Caribbean stuff they were pretty good with all the entertainment, the dining. The only slight disappointment is, as with it's looking more and more frequently, no lobster night. They did not serve any lobster for complimentary in the dining room.
And that's one of the things that used to be like the big deal. I mean, I guess that's, the gamers, the gamers got gamed, unfortunately. How folks used to kind of get multiple lobster tails.
I was one of those people, but I don't know if it was just the game. I mean, the gaming was a little bit maybe, but I feel like it was just, it's more cost cutting than them reacting to anything the passengers were doing.
You hear that story about how taking one olive out of the American Airlines salad saved American Airlines, like, I mean, it put them to profitability, supposedly, right?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how much Royal Caribbean is saving on the lobster tails.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a significant amount. And the thing is, I mean, I get it. I mean, they have billions of dollars of debt that they incurred over, being shut down from the pandemic that they need to pay back. But my guess is they're on a pretty good track to do that at this point.
Oh yeah, everything's full. I mean, you said it yourself at the start. This was only your 4th cruise of the year, and I think like last year or the year before, you were like 6 or 10. It's harder to get those free cruises or those heavily discounted cruises.
It's a combination because as you end up cruising more, I think you get more selective about what you want to cruise because you've done a lot of the other things that you've already done, which you're not looking to repeat. And then on top of that, the cruise lines themselves have gotten less generous with some of the itineraries because they're selling out. So they don't have to subsidize the casino department if it's a complimentary cruise or whatever. They don't have to do that because they don't have this excess inventory to push. So now a lot of what you get kind of offered complimentary oftentimes are these kind of shorter cruises, which, because of the positioning costs or just, the fact that I've done them in the past, not as interesting.
Or the timing, right? Like, I mean, if it's a Monday to Friday cruise, what's the point?
Exactly.
So let's wrap up your trip. You got off your cruise. Did you spend any more time in Sydney?
I spent an additional day and was able to actually visit some of the Chinatown area that we talked with Joe Chung about in the previous episode. Got to see, I think, the Marathon Suites or whatever that he had stayed. I got to see where that was. Had a nice lunch at Din Tai Fung. And also got to stay at the brand new W Sydney, which is only open for a month or so. And it's interesting because I was looking at some of the reviews of the W Sydney and people were just ripping it apart. And I could kind of tell that this was definitely a hotel that is still getting its legs underneath it. It's funny that I was greeted by the general manager, and I have a feeling he's making a point to do that with all the elite members, just to make sure that he can do whatever he can to not have the ratings of this place, stabilize some of those, because I was looking at some of the reviews and people were just really tearing a new hole for this hotel. I didn't experience anything particular that maybe one thing, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that would deserve kind of anything negative. I mean, the room was beautiful, upgraded me to a spectacular room, not a suite, but it was still decently big with a really big bathroom and very nice amenities and a really well-stocked mini bar with all kinds of little W branded things that you could buy. They also offered breakfast, which sometimes, Marriott hotels play games, with the platinum breakfast benefit. This one, they did not. They proactively asked if I'd like that, and that is what I desired. And I think it would have been 55 Australian dollars otherwise for the breakfast buffet, and was extremely nice. I thought it was great. I was not charged for my Diet Coke. Sometimes they'll charge me for a Diet Coke. One of these breakfast buffets, they did not. I had a very, very lovely spread of different foods in a very stylish restaurant on, I think, their third floor or whatever, that kind of looks over, it looks over the freeway. So there's Darling Harbor in the background, but it's kind of funny. When we were having dinner with our Sydney locals, they were saying, "Oh yeah, we know that hotel. Yeah, sometimes I drive down that freeway, and when the traffic's all backed up, I'm looking at people eating breakfast."
And then W's don't have lounges, right?
No lounge to speak of. No. I think they might have had some welcome beverages in the evening, but again, I didn't really investigate that too closely.
It's interesting that, you mentioned that feedback on the W. I remember very similar feedback when the Hyatt Regency opened up just like a couple of blocks away. I mean, essentially folks are like, yeah, it's a 4 Points trying to masquerade as a Hyatt Regency. So, I mean, maybe in that, in I don't know if it's maybe, the other hotels in that city are just so amazing, or the expectations are just so much higher, or maybe the pricing. I mean, the pricing on I was looking at the W.
I think the pricing is part of it.
It was not inexpensive.
No, it was. I think it was. This is Australian dollars, but I think it was like $700+ Australian if I were to do. Fortunately, I had an expiring certificate that I need to find a good home, and that's what I used it for. But yeah, I think if I were paying I think that was still like $400 or $500 US. If I were paying that for that hotel, I expect things to work really well. And it's the largest W, I think, maybe in the world, I think.
So
and
that's even
part
more
of it.
Interesting, right? The Hyatt Regency Sydney was the biggest hotel in the country. I don't know whether the W now is even bigger or not.
I don't think it's bigger than the Hyatt Regency, but it's big for a W. And of course, the customer service standards of what people are expecting and spending the room rates that they are pretty high. And they were still I think a lot of their staff probably still needed a lot of training and a lot of onboarding. And it's hard to do that. And to their credit, there were people everywhere. They were asking me, "Oh, had I been helped?" They were trying to do their best. And so I have to give them, in general, pretty good job overall. As far as people knew my name, which is amazing. I don't know how they do that, but they knew who I was. Of course, I'm a Mr. Kim, so maybe they were just guessing.
Maybe they were easy guess. That's an easy guess. Huh?
But I could also see them running, just reports of, here are the elite members that are joining us today. That's probably pretty typical of a high-end hotel like that. So yeah, I ended up having some interactions with the staff. They were all very pleasant, very talkative, very welcoming. So can't say enough overall good things. The only negative thing was they did charge me for the award stay. So I got a bill. And I was like, that's odd. Why do I have an accommodations fee on here? I did take a drink from the minibar because, it's funny. They have custom cocktails in bottles. Happened to be from this Almost Sammy, I think was the name of the bar. Always Be Sammy. I forget what the name of the bar is, but the bar that we had drinks at the night before in Sydney. So I was like, oh, hey, this is the bar that we went to. And they had them on the mini bar. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to steal one of these. They'll just have to figure out. I'll have to figure out how much I owe them. I don't think they charged me for that, but they did charge me for accommodation, even though that probably should have been going to Marriott corporate, not to my Marriott credit card.
How much is it? Just like the Sydney tourism tax or something?
No, it ended up being about 200 Australian dollars, like $142 or something like that US, I think. It wasn't taxes. It was accommodation fee. So I don't know if that's what Marriott would reimburse them or something, but
you didn't end up paying that since you used your cert, right? Did you?
Yeah. No, I emailed them later and I was like, hey, can I get a line item invoice of what this is? Because this was an award stay, and they thought, oh, sorry, sir, we're going to refund that.
Oops.
So that was the only one glitch with the stay, but otherwise, yeah, very nice stay.
And you expect glitches with a new hotel. I mean,
Yes,
at least I
yes.
do. That's just par for the course. And sometimes there's opportunities with those sorts of things. That minibar might have been comped intentionally instead of just an oversight. Those little things, because they want you to come back. And so even if you don't have a stellar experience, they're going to try to find ways to at least make up for it.
Yeah, I think they realize that they need to shore up their reviews. I probably should actually do a review and give them the good marks, because I think overall they created a reasonably good stay and even value, at least for the points. You know, it was ended up being, I think, 66,000 Marriott Bonvoy points for the stay.
That just feels like a lot for,
It's a lot.
you know, yeah.
I think Sydney's a tough market. I think Sydney's definitely not a market where the high-end hotels are discounted. I think they're actually probably overpriced. The Park Hyatt Sydney is usually way expensive for what it is. Don't get me wrong; it's beautiful. It's a beautiful experience, but I'm kind of glad I didn't stay at the Park Hyatt Sydney for once.
45,000 points now.
I know, it's ridiculous. I'm glad we got our stays in when it wasn't that high.
I mean, it's almost at Marriott numbers.
Yes. And those points are worth quite a bit more usually.
Exactly. So how do you get home?
Interestingly enough, through Melbourne. I've never been through Melbourne, and their airport's very interesting. It's very interesting. And they're another city that gets a lot of pretty high class airplane travel, right? They've got the A380 Emirates. They've got Qatar Airways. I think it was like a 777 there. They've got, like, when I was leaving, but the international terminal was very quiet. I was there for an extended time, so I actually got to visit pretty much every lounge in that facility, except for maybe the New Zealand lounge and Air New Zealand lounge, and there might have been a SkyTeam lounge there, but I forget what it was. But pretty much visited everything else. I went to the Plaza Premium Lounge, which is very interesting because it's connected to the Amex Lounge via the restrooms. So you come out of the restrooms and it says, you see, wait, what's this? Oh, this is the Amex Lounge in the Plaza Premium Lounge. They kind of share the same catering. Very quiet there. I was like maybe one of only 2 or 3 people between the 2 lounges, the Plaza Premium and the Amex Lounge. This was, of course, in the afternoon where there weren't any real flights leaving, so I guess that makes sense. But also got to visit Qantas Business Lounge, also another one of these dungeony, basement lounges with no views. They have something called the House Lounge, which is the Priority Pass Lounge, which is actually the Etihad Lounge, which is now available via Priority Pass. That was pretty... I forget if Etihad doesn't fly there right now. Maybe that's why it's a contract lounge right now. But yeah, the food and beverage were pretty poor in there. But the views were nice and the furniture was nice.
Yeah, their lounge style is pretty interesting. I've flown out of their Sydney lounge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very classy. Yep. So how did you fly out?
I flew out on Qantas Business on their 787, another really good business class product. Actually, I would say I had the best business class sleep that I've had, I think, on a plane, believe it or not, because they had mattress pads, the bedding was nice, again, air vents. It was doing all the right things. So the seats, it was the new seat that they have on the 787s. Very nice, staggered seats. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it was a great experience. Service was good. Again, nothing memorable about the dining, but, again, not too interested. Again, I did actually get to go also visit the Qantas First Lounge in Melbourne, and that's also an interesting lounge just because it's kind of like the mini-me of the Sydney one. It looks pretty much the same, although I would even say it has slightly better views of the runway and stuff than the Sydney one.
Well, and that's probably a factor of just the way the airport is laid out, right? I mean, yeah, Sydney, those runways are kind of piers, whereas I think Melbourne, I thought the terminal was a little bit more centrally located.
It is. I think it's more condensed than Sydney.
So I've never actually flown out of the international side of that of Melbourne, believe it or not. So like I mean I can't even picture the experience that you had other than clearly the Plaza Premium and the American Express proximity to restrooms and stuff. I mean you paint the picture well, but having not been through there, I have to ask: is it a similar vibe as Sydney, where I mean I kind of think Sydney kind of feels like what is it, Terminal 2? Is it T2 or T3 in London, where Virgin and American goes out of? Where
T3 just feels
big,
T3
area.
Actually is pretty good pretty good analog to actually Melbourne, except without the people. Because at least when Melbourne, even though it was all condensed and tiny in a way, there weren't that many people or flights, so it wasn't as overrun as I think T3 is at Heathrow, where they squeeze a lot of people into the public areas. Because the other odd thing about T3, right, at Heathrow is, they have all those gates that there's nothing there, right? There's no restaurants or seating or lounges or anything. All the lounges are kind of in the central area. And then you've got fingers of these kind of like appendages of gates, right? Where there's no other things there, maybe a bathroom. That's it.
Yeah, and that's the thing that throws me off on some of these airports. I mean, I get the value of having everything centralized, but to the same point, there's just also so much value in kind of being closer to your gate.
Yeah, I would say Sydney's a lot more sprawling. I would say it feels more like I don't know what it feels like. It's probably closer to what Tibet feels like, than how if, from what I recall, compared to. Of course, I only got to see it this time on the end of the flight instead of at the beginning. Just in terms of like space and layout and things like that, because you weren't quite on top of each other, I think, at Sydney as compared to Melbourne, where really literally things were on top of each other, right? Because you had lounges in the basement floor, you had restaurants and retail in the middle, and then you had another set of lounges on the top floor.
Wow. That's just very condensed. Okay, so you flew Melbourne to LA?
Yes, again, 787, very nice flight. Can't say enough good things. Very excellent business class flight, 55,000 mile redemption on Alaska. Definitely recommend it before the award chart changes. Actually was able to tack on another transcon in first class for another trip at the end of that award, which I also recommend you do. It's a little bit more of a level 2 award redemption thing for Alaska Airlines, mainly just because it's really hard to find an Alaska award that exactly times correctly with an award that you might happen to get from Qantas. Both of those are hard to match up. So just realize it don't have to necessarily be right after each other. You can inject a stopover on a one-way Alaska award. And one way to do that is if you happen to have a flight booked from, let's say, Australia to LA and could use another LA transcon later on in the year, go ahead and book it when you can find it and stitch that together as part of one award and realize you don't have to fly it all together.
So walk us through that for a second here. So in order to do that, you're going through the multi-city tool.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you can book it that way, yeah.
Not to get too much in the weeds here, just because we want to try to wrap up in a moment here. But are you searching just for that one-way transcon, and then once you find that transcon and you found your Trans-Pacific, then you go into a multi-city tool and do a search that way?
I can tell you how I did it. How I did it was I did end up calling in. I ended up booking my overwater segment online because I didn't want that. Obviously those are very time sensitive.
You don't want to lose that.
Don't want to lose that.
Talking about losing flight.
I would just book that first and then call in and make the change. Once you've paid the fees for that Alaska flight, and Alaska does charge you a partner booking fee, you can call in even as a non-elite and make as many changes as you want. So that's a good thing to know. And they're usually pretty good. You're usually going to get a U.S. agent. And I would say 2 out of the 3 times I've called in, they knew exactly what to do and they took care of it right away.
And that's just awesome when you can get through. It used to be that Alaska, you'd get right through every time. You get right to a person. And then they went through this period of time where it was
lately they've been good. I've been calling them. Again, I've had to make changes to these flights multiple times because things came up where I suddenly found, now there's a business. I was originally booked premium economy, by the way, guys, and then a business flight came up from Brisbane. I was like, okay, I'll fly through Brisbane, no problem. So I call in and make that change. Oh, and then there was a business class flight from Melbourne. I was like, I think I'd rather go to Melbourne because they have a first class lounge. Let's do that.
I was worried for you when you said you were going to do premium economy across the pond. Well, that's not a pond. The Pacific is not the pond.
It was good enough for Joe Chung. So, I guess as one podcast sidekick, they set the standard. So I thought it'd be fine. But, hey, business class came up and it's not that much more than premium economy, at least on the current chart for Alaska awards. So I was like, hey, it's a no-brainer. If it's available, let's book it. So I called in. And most of the times I've been calling in on Alaska, and I'm not an elite. I am now, actually, because my Delta match finally came through. But at the time I was not. And I was still getting through to the regular call center pretty quick. Not extensive waits on hold.
You can't beat that. So not to put you on the spot, because I don't think you've got a spreadsheet of all your all the changes you had to make. How many different changes do you think you had to make for this trip? I mean, obviously you pivoted from going through Vietnam. Then you upgraded yourself as you continued to, as we call it, garden your reservations, which is just so important. I mean, you never know when space is going to become available, and you can get just a little bit more of an ideal scenario.
I'll tell you this much. The transoceanic portion of both ways changed at least 3 times. So we've had at least 6 iterations of this itinerary, because I've been booked on 3 different versions on the way there and 3 different versions on the way back. I can tell you that much.
all
Crazy.
for one notable port of call on the cruise.
Yes,
and the cruise island.
It was a notable one. The funny thing is, one of the friends I went with, we've been joking about New Caledonia and for years, and I don't know what the fascination was to start with. I think originally it was because literally a decade plus ago, I think I had some fascination with this island, because first of all, who ever heard of New Caledonia? I mean, it's not exactly the most common South Pacific area that you're going to hear about.
I feel like a planet in Stargate SG-1 had a city named New Caledonia.
Yes.
And it was like a recurring visiting,
yes.
or a recurring place. That's what I first thought of.
Well, it got on my map because it was a sweet spot in the Flying Blue award chart for the longest time, because you could fly.
Noumea, yeah.
Yes, from Tokyo to Noumea on Air Colin, who is a Flying Blue partner, or not even partner. They actually use Flying Blue as their loyalty program. On that award chart, there was some really, really good use of miles for that relatively long flight between Tokyo and Noumea. So that's kind of why it had a fascination. So when my friends, by the way, who booked this long ago before I did, kind of teasing me, they're like, "You always wanted to go to New Caledonia, and guess what? We're going to go without you." And that was kind of the gauntlet was thrown down at that point. I was like, okay, I'm finding a way there. And it took 6 iterations, right? But it actually got to the point where this is actually one of the most perfect, I think, air itineraries that I ended up getting. I mean, it was all premium. It was all in excellent classes on planes I wanted to fly, without ton of repositioning, a day before and a day after the cruise. I mean, can you get any better than all that?
No, it sounds about as good as you're going to get.
It really is. It really was. So I'm really happy about it. I'm excited. I think I exercised all of my award travel muscles to make it happen. And I think it ended up being a great trip. I'm really excited about it. I'm really glad that I did it. I'm glad we were able to talk about it. I'm happy to share my trip, and hope other people are able to replicate it, because it was a good one. And I would say for those out there, book your 55,000 mile Alaska awards to Australia in business as soon as you can.
You definitely have me with FOMO of Australia, but that's a conversation for another time.
I think so.
Well, that's the show. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed listening.
If you've enjoyed this episode, consider becoming a Milenomics Patreon member and get access to even more in-depth miles, points, and travel content.
Until then, we hope your next story is a travel story.